let's go ahead and get started. I'm here with Mr. Fatal. That's a name that I gave him. And just to let people know, I am Emmy Thomas. I wrote Confessions of a Sociopath, a life spent hiding in plain sight, I think is how it goes. And usually I have been, for the past few years, going around meeting people. But in this era of coronavirus, and with the rise of, great technology like Zoom, etc., I've been meeting people remotely. And so this is Mr. Fatal. He is, I think he identifies as being on the sociopathic, psychopathic spectrum. I don't make a distinction between those two terms. I use them interchangeably. I know others do, but I don't think there's a consensus there. So maybe we'll just get some background from Mr. Fatal about kind of his ideas about his own self at first. Like, do you consider yourself on the psychopathic spectrum?
Yes. Uh, Also, I am a former paratrooper,
Oh, cool.
and
That's
yes,
cool.
and in terms of the spectrum, if we look at what you consider a psychopath, right? Recklessness, some of the non-homicidal variants of it, that's firefighters, uh, police officers, military, because it's this disregard for your own life. You have to have that if you're going into combat.
So you do think that that psychopaths do well in those professions, and that maybe even there's a higher percentage of psychopaths in those professions than are in, ordinary populations?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we have to get away from the idea of a stark raving lunatic. That is, because I do believe it is a spectrum. You can possess traits, you can possess so-called psychopathic traits, and not all of them. There's a book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths, and I
Right, Kevin
forget.
Dutton.
There you go. Okay.
Mhm.
And he interviews, military firefighters, etc. But then he also interviews, people sitting on death row.
Oh, really?
So,
I
oh
haven't read
yeah,
it yet, but I thought it mostly
very
focused
good.
on that guy, Andy McNabb, who is like, I guess, a spy, British spy or something. He talks about him.
If Yeah, but it's been a while, so I don't really recall. But what I took from the book is that this is a guy addressing the spectrum,
Right.
right?
I see.
And that there is, look, if we want people to put out our fires, if we want people to fight our wars, if we want people to arrest dangerous people, then you need people on that spectrum.
Right.
You need us, right?
Yeah,
Like,
go ahead.
go ahead. Well, I was gonna say, I mean, I love animals. I love animals, but I like animals better than I do people, frankly. You, you know, um, so it's we have to get away from this all or nothing concept, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I don't think it's Kevin Dutton. I actually think it's um, James Fallon, who says that psychopaths are the people who do the dirty work of life. They evolved to kind of be this way. And a lot of people would not be able to run into the burning buildings, jump out of a plane,
Hmm.
shoot people, be honestly like a sniper, where all you're doing is just killing somebody. You're killing them. It's not like you're just firing into a field of whatever, and maybe you'll hit someone or maybe you'll not. Same thing with police officers, to even draw your service weapon, and to discharge it is to understand that you are doing maybe somebody some mortal harm, and risking your own life as well. Like who would be willing to do these things? I think it is a unique type of personality. I think kind of with Black Lives Matter and stuff, we kind of hear that personality has some downsides, maybe, not even just psychopaths, but like, who does this attract? Does it attract people who seek power? Does it attract people who seek control? Does it attract people who want to kind of be able to do violence to others in these ways that are more lawful than in other ways? And I think, to a certain extent, you can kind of count psychopaths amongst them. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in the military, when I was in the 82nd Airborne, I know for a fact that there were my squad leader, for one, when I was in Iraq, was probably one of the quote unquote bad psychopaths, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, he got the job done, but this this was a bad guy, and there were others, and that's the nature of the job. What the military does, though, is the crazy, out of control ones, they don't make it. They barely make it past recruitment, right? And you still have to be a team player. You just have to. And the military is very, very, very good at indoctrinating people. I
Hmm.
mean, extremely good. I think, actually, my greatest fear the whole time I was in, and especially in combat, was that I would do something that would get my buddies killed.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And so you might say, "Oh, that sounds altruistic." Well, um, yes and no. I mean, they are your brothers, and you count on them. And I say brothers because I was infantry. It's all men.
Right.
But then there's the personal shame. There would be the dishonor, the shame that you did something, that you were not an effective soldier, that in
Uh-huh.
fact you were a terrible soldier. Uh, so that is something that I think, that's how the military does that sort of workaround. That, okay, we're not dealing with people that pretend to be empaths, which I don't think there's such a thing anyway.
Uh-huh.
Um, but we still need these people, with the ability to kill another person, um, to care about their buddies. Does that make any sense at
Yeah,
all?
it makes sense to me. So, let's just kind of unpack, because often, I found this is true. I frequently in social media too will encounter somebody who shares my opinion, and then I realize they've come to it from an entirely different angle, right? The reason why they share my opinion is for sometimes even where I'm like, okay, that's wrong reasoning, or I
Uh,
just disagree with the reasoning, even though we agree with how we get there. And I think
yeah,
sometimes we see that with psychopaths, and normal people have a little bit of a hard time understanding. They're probably, yeah, you like love your brother and you want to be a good soldier, right? I get that, but that's what normal people want to do. But like, what about what made you want to take care of your brother infantryman? And why did you want to do a good job? What was it about this? You mentioned shame. Like, can you like unpack those ideas?
well, it's all about honor. I mean, ultimately, honor is a huge thing in the military, and it has been for thousands and thousands since the very beginning, right?
Right.
Um, Honor and glory, like, dying in battle, right, has always been, you know, one of the most honorable things that you could possibly do.
Right.
Um, Now that's certainly not, um, that's not a selfish desire from the standpoint of, oh, I want to live. It's a selfish desire in terms of, I'm one-upping everybody else,
I
if that
see.
sounds. Yeah, but it's, it's the whole point of, being in essence a historical figure, right?
Right. Larger than
Uh,
life.
yeah, pretty much. But honor is something that just gets ingrained in you from the very beginning. Um, doing and that's actually one of my pet peeves about normal everyday civilian life is that there's no honorable people. I
Mm.
mean, people don't believe in honor.
Right. It's not as common a value. So it kind of makes sense to me because I've met and known and even dated or had other friendships or relationships with people where I feel like they were on a search for meaning, and to them military service was like a quick and dirty way, you know, not so much dirty maybe, but just a quick and easy way to get that meaning. Because if you were, you have a sense that you want your life to mean something, and if
Hmm.
you are dying on a battlefield, then it means something because you're performing this heroic act on behalf of a bunch of people who are incapable of doing that. You're protecting innocence, even if the war is not as honorable as maybe some other wars are, because there are all these fellow countrymen who are unable to do the things that you've trained yourself to do, your body to do, your mind to do. And so you're performing this act on behalf of somebody always, when you're part of the military service. So I think there's something like that. I used to kind of think, maybe this kind of sounds familiar, maybe not. I used to think of of things being in terms of like really kind of like everything in life can be just put in an Excel spreadsheet kind of thing. Like they're all ups and downs, all little factors of pluses and minuses. And sometimes to force myself to do things like go to work at a job I didn't like, I would think, okay, I'm just getting money, and that money is just going to translate into time and opportunity later. So I can kind of see how somebody would be like, okay, all you're doing is just trading years of your life for this other opportunity, which is a very unique opportunity. And really, how valuable are those years of your life in a
Hmm.
way? I at least,
Hmm.
and let me know if this is, I'm just kind of like, thinking out loud here. I have a friend who's not psychopathic, but, is so full of anxiety that he's like, the years of my life are so poor that he almost wanted to commit a crime so he could go to prison so he wouldn't have to worry about anything, wouldn't have to worry about paying his rent, wouldn't have to worry about going to a job, wouldn't have to worry about these other things. So I can kind of see how like something can become almost like not even a fantasy, but just like, like this has its ups. Even things that you think don't have upsides have their upsides for people, especially if they're kind of thinking in this mechanical way of just, it's all trade-offs. And this is a trade-off that you're willing to make, either because and probably most of these soldiers, their mind, the honor was so important. In your mind, the honor was maybe important, but also kind of the opportunity cost was low, maybe. In this sense, like, did you have like a lot of other things that you wanted to do that were really pressing, or you were like, this is military service is actually the best of options when you're not super passionate about another option?
Well, I mean, it, everybody in my family has fought in a war,
Hmm.
so it's something we do. Um, every male has fought in a war, um, and I kind of started down that path at a really young age because of Taekwondo, studying Taekwondo.
Hmm.
And the instructor that I had was actually sort of the second wave of Taekwondo instructors that brought Taekwondo into the country, in the 60s, right? Um, and he had taught the ROK, Republic of Korea Rangers.
Hmm.
And so the way they do that is, they'll just, you can find video, but there'll just be hundreds of these guys in formation, and they're going through one steps and forms and you know kicks, etc. So, we had um, I I had the military mindset, from a very young age.
Right.
And also, um, my late mother had been schizophrenic. So we just didn't have a lot of money, just
Mm.
especially because, her medical cost, et cetera, and my dad having to just, deal with that and work. And, you know, um, so they basically uh, sent me to Taekwondo school, right?
Hmm.
Here's a chance, you know, for me to get this discipline. And, it's kind of like, I don't want to call it daycare, but it kind of is, except you have a bunch of black belts running around telling you what to do, and they can make you do push-ups. And
Right.
I taught Taekwondo as well. I mean, and that's typically what happens. You get the sort of problem cases. I wasn't a problem case, but you definitely get them. Parents that just don't know what to do with this intense energy their children have.
Hmm.
And I'm sort of digressing a little bit here.
No.
Um, but so in other words, I knew I was a warrior. I knew I had that particular gene from a very, very early age.
And
And
have you
to me, that's
done,
what it is.
yeah, have you done the DNA tests and stuff? Do you have the warrior gene?
I don't know. I don't know.
Don't
It's
sell your
just something
genetics
you,
to the government. Yeah, don't do it.
oh, they have my genetics.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dang it. That's the one thing that's kind of kept me from government service, honestly. And I don't mean to say, like, I'm not one of these people who's like, okay, you can't have honor as a motivation. Because honestly, like, I think that one word I've been using is aesthetic. I think that psychopaths often do have an aesthetic for something about how they want the world to look, about how they want other people to act, and it really does kind of offend them aesthetically, if not morally, when people don't. So for instance, you saying that,
Yeah,
you don't like that people don't have honor. I have an aesthetic for truth telling. I think that I am like a truth seeker, and that is
sure.
despite lying numerous times, like, just because that's my aesthetic doesn't mean like my disorder hasn't sometimes led to different behavior, right? But my true belief, or my true preference, let's say, is in the truth. And so I do kind of think, like, okay, when people just disregard the truth completely, I mean, it's almost disgusting to me. It's like repugnant. It, like, the same if you saw, like a color or a flavor or taste or something that you just did not like. It does not fit your particular preferences, your aesthetic for how things should go. So would you say that honor is like that for you? You've always kind of felt like honor is like, basically only one of the things in this world worth having, honor.
I would say honor, and I would say something that annoys me greatly is that people are, in bearing in mind that I grew up in an Asian system, right?
Right.
That is Taekwondo. Um, that people don't have respect for each other.
Mm.
It annoys me to no end that when someone is trying to tell me something, sell me something, they decide they can just call me by my first name. I mean, I'm not trying to, you know, be mean about it, but I don't know this person. I don't presume to call them. It's just a sort of lack of respect,
Hmm.
like people, or and politeness. I
Right.
don't. I
It's
mean,
good that I'm calling you Mr. Fatal then.
no, 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 no. You don't. No.
But I understand it. I grew up in California. It's super lax when it comes to things like that. Whenever I go to the South, to visit family or things, it's sir this, ma'am that, and it
Hmm.
is like you can tell it is more respectful. I even like one of these like viral videos is like this little 2-year-old or something saying sir and ma'am, as he's getting in trouble, and I'm like, so cute that he's so
Right.
polite, right? And it is nicer. It's like, nicer communities that have like nice sidewalks and nice parks and stuff. It's nicer than not having sidewalks and parks, like I think we can all agree about that.
Yeah, and um, well, and if I want to put on my architect hat,
Hmm.
it's interesting you mentioned the sidewalks and parks. That's a tenet of new urbanism, which, by the way, new urbanism has been around since the 60s.
Hmm.
But the idea that instead of just continuous strip malls, right? Um, we have sidewalks, and we have, and there's a lot of fodderall into new urbanism that I won't go into, but um, it's the idea of that you enhance community, right? Um, how you do this is, you have street level retail. You have this kind of interaction. Now,
Hmm.
from I will say that even though if I was designing something, that's certainly what I would take into account. Meanwhile, I live way, way, way out in the sticks, and I was born and raised in, a major city. And, after the army, I was like, I'm not going back there. So, which is like not actually unheard of. I mean, that honestly even goes back to the Romans. Uh, so, uh, but that doesn't mean I still don't think that, we need this sense of community, because ultimately, and I think this is a sociopathic desire. If it makes my life easier if people act like they have some common sense.
Hmm.
I mean, that makes my life easier. I don't have to pretend that I'm showing empathy. I mean, the fact is, it's just easier.
So
Um,
like in these type of situations, because let me tell you a little bit something, maybe you have some experience with it, you can say yes or no. One thing that I've kind of noticed, and this is the nice thing about talking to multiple people, is you can see things that are patterns and not patterns, and things that I used to think are like 90 to 100% applicable. I realized, oh, they're common, they're very common, but maybe just like 30 to 40% amongst people who share these kind of traits, spectrum traits. But one thing
yeah,
that I experience is gray rage. And it's like a very, another psychopath is the one that called it gray rage, but it's like this very cold rage. And it happens in very specific situations, almost always while I'm traveling. And, my psychopathic girlfriend says it's when somebody has, a false sense of their own security and a false sense of their own authority, but I think she usually flips it. First, it's their false sense of their own authority. So basically, they're telling me what to do. They're like infringing what I think. Even though as a psychopath, I feel like I have a weak sense of self. But in that moment, they're infringing my personhood in a way that I cannot like tolerate, and it just like causes me to flip out and to like think, okay, nothing else matters. The only thing I can see right now is my anger for this person, and I just want to eliminate the threat that this person is, kind of thing. And so I often get it while I'm traveling, because I will be kind of tired and people won't show me proper courtesy. So maybe of like a flight attendant might get a little bit of gray rage, because sometimes flight attendants, I do think, exceed their authority, right? Or some of these other
mm,
types of people who are used to kind of telling other people what to do. So do you think at all like this idea of like politeness, and it's like less of a burden on you when they're showing good sense? Do you think that it's kind of associated with that it's just like otherwise people sort of make incursions on you and your choices and your kind of personhood, or your ability to be your own autonomous agent, the ruler of your own life?
yeah, absolutely. And I would say even more than that, when this happens to other people, then as a whole society, um, society is damaged. If, in other words, if we have a whole bunch of people telling a whole bunch of other people, um, what to do when they don't have the authority or the even moral ground to do so, or
Right.
even legal ground, then that affects society as a whole, and um, and that can, in essence, possibly make me have a bad day.
Right.
Is sort of the ripple effect, right?
Yes.
So,
And
you know, uh,
I I think that I always kind of sense that, and now I don't experience, for people who are concerned about the flight attendants on my flight, I don't
mm,
experience gray rage the same way post therapy, because my therapist has kind of helped me to understand, like, okay, these feelings that you had, that this was completely inappropriate, are okay, but it's not okay to kind of almost kind of like you're bottling it up and then like letting it explode on one particular person who's particularly egregious or something, sort of thing. But that there's this concept of like personhood and autonomy and agency that you have to respect, and that everybody, the one thing that they can claim a right to is to their own life and their own choices. That's essentially kind of what I learned from therapy. And so I started to see, this is why seeing that truth kind of caused me to change certain things that I was doing, like manipulating, etc., to now like the only thing that I think is like, most sacrosanct in terms of personal interrelationships is this agency. Like, people make their own choices. I cannot interfere. I don't have the right to interfere. That's like their own property, their own, kind of like stand your ground. They can defend it with with, what do we say, mortal harm or whatever. They can shoot me to do it. And it's kind of funny because, as you say, I think there is a tendency in our society to not believe this, to think that it's okay to kind of step in on behalf of all sorts of other people and tell them their business. And I think it's interesting because you'll see it, I think, in mostly the extremes of the political spectrum, especially in the United States,
mhm,
the left and the right. So I have
mhm,
clearly I have leftist relatives who are like, they're not going to be satisfied until there's a bloody revolution. Like, really, they want blood in the streets. That's the only thing. And I'm like, so you're going to like kill people because they disagree with you about, the way the economy should be managed? That's what you're going to do, is like take away not just somebody's right to have their own thought, but their life over this. And then there are other people on the flip side, kind of like QAnon kind of conspiracy theorists, who suggest that, the only way that people can, live a good life or something is to XYZ. And I kind of am like, great that you have found, and some of these tenants are like fine, like in the example of the QAnon person, she went from being completely, kind of beholden to what she thought society required of her, and living her life just, in terms of like what she thought was going to be, what the social norms were, essentially, to kind of deciding for herself what she believed. And I think that's great. But is she really deciding for herself? I wondered. But that's up for her to decide. But especially, number one thing that is the flaw in her thinking is she can't decide for everybody else how they think, how they act, how they choose. And she's really kind of like, will call people stupid for thinking otherwise, and all these different things. And I just think there's a concept, actually, I'm Mormon, LDS, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and there's like this concept in a Mormon scripture about you cannot assert authority over people, essentially. Like, you have like a very narrow range of authority, maybe your own children to a certain extent, your own self, yes. And if you have like other things under your stewardship, let's say you're a police officer, you're able to arrest people. Let's say you're a judge, you're able to make judgments, okay, but do not exceed that authority. Never exceed that authority. And they say if you want something to change, it has to be from gentle persuasion, meekness, long
mm,
suffering. You're trying to entice the person, but in like this very, like, not even a manipulative way. You have to be very careful not to overly influence them, even, because you have to respect this agency that they have. And this family member who's like the QAnon person is like, I don't see that happening with her. I see that there's a lot of pressure on other people to conform. actually, to
Hmm.
that kind of way of thinking. So I do think that it is like a huge problem in society, what you've described.
And I think it ultimately comes down to people just can't mind their own business.
Yes.
Uh, I mean, everyone is entitled to opinions, even if they're wrong, but people just cannot mind their own business. There's just that's what that's what really annoys me. Um, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Or so one of the things that have stuck out a lot, one of the things I took away from your book, right, is when you near the end of the book, you wrote you would be interested in raising, and hopefully I'm not putting words in your mouth. Hopefully I'm remembering correctly. Raising, a sociopathic child,
Oh
right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, I've thought a lot about that. That just has stuck in my mind. And I mean, I read the book like forever ago, right? Well, listened to it actually. And so that has, you know, uh, made me think about, what are the challenges, right? And one of the things that occurred to me, this has been something I've thought about a lot, actually. Uh, don't ask me why, but is I think and maybe this is just me, but I think one of the things that makes me, one of the symptoms, one of the things that makes me sociopathic is that I have a tendency to not care what people think. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like it doesn't occur to me to care what people think, right?
Yes.
Uh, like, if like when I've discovered that maybe in the workplace people have gossiped about me, right? And well, why do they even care?
Yeah.
What, why are they, why are they talking about me?
Yes.
What was the point of all that? Because it doesn't occur to me to sort of care what they're thinking. And so I think that in childhood, and I was one of those that, and it took years and years and years, that did have to learn to, I don't want to say fake emotion, right? But that, okay, this is sort of the emotion you need to feel. This is what you need to say,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and, that's something I had to learn because I didn't know I had to learn it.
Right.
Okay. And so if you're a child, right, a sociopathic child, a psychopathic child, it isn't, and like I said before, I love animals. I've got, chickens and horses and dogs and cats, so I'm not talking about the crazy people,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but, um, it's, uh, I think I wish somebody had at some point, you know, took me and said, okay, you know, um, people are actually thinking about you,
Mm-hmm.
even though you don't know why they would even bother and what's the point. And am I making any kind of sense here?
Yes, yes, and in fact, I mean, I think there's a couple kind of things that I think are interesting. Number one is like I do think it's almost a superpower that that psychopaths don't care what other people think. Number two, though, I do agree with you that it's one thing to not care about it, and it's another thing to not be aware of it. And I think
Mm,
that I have experienced, I'm not going to put words in your mouth either, but maybe a similar thing, or I had kind of a similar realization myself as a child, that I was kind of just living my life and kind of ignoring, like I guess I understood that, there were kids that were being ostracized. I never really cared to do that, but then I learned kind of when I went through a period myself, I like fourth, maybe fifth, kind of sixth grade into sixth grade, where I was like a social, we don't know what to do with you. And when children don't know what to do with somebody, they kind of are like, this person's weird. And,
Mm.
especially kind of the moral judgments of children are pretty like blunt or whatever. And so
Mm.
then it took a while for me to understand, okay, even though I don't care what they think about me, it does affect my life. And so then I think I discussed this in the book. I started kind of crafting this persona that was
Yeah,
going to be like more palatable for other people, like showing the correct emotions, being interested in cool stuff, doing these things where it was like, even I guess I wasn't super interested in conforming. It wasn't like that. It was more like, hey, I'm going to like pick up surfing because then I can be one of just like these surfer girls and people will leave me alone about it, like if I
sure.
just adopt this kind of, dominant trait, which it's so easy to just learn surfing. And if that's all it takes to just kind of, get along with your peers, then it was like that seems to make sense. So I can kind of, maybe that's what you're talking about. I also want to say a quick thing about animals, because I've
Mm.
heard like, yes, I don't know what is the deal with people and animals. Like I start off, my story by saying that, I killed a baby opossum or tried to, right? And some people on, far loving animal spectrum would think, that's horrible. But honestly, I do not know what to do with animals. I did not really grow up with animals. Even if I fished that opossum out of the pool, I would not know what to do. Is it dead or, whatever, do I call somebody? And so I think it was mostly just it's currently struggling and it has no use in its life probably anymore for these last few minutes of life. And I don't have, I cannot do anything to it. So I will just kind of end its life. It was not like I'm trying to torment this. I was just kind of like, almost like if you see a piece of trash on the ground, in a beautiful park and you're just like, oh, let me just pick up this trash. To me, that
Mm.
was like more the idea. And it's interesting because I've talked to another person who, sad story, kind of, there was like a dog who was like very, like sick looking, clearly sick, clearly starving, clearly kind of dying of something. And she was very young, 8, 9, 10, also psychopathic spectrum, little psychopath child. And she was used to her family shooting their animals when it got that
Mm.
way. Maybe this was like traditionally they either didn't have access to veterinarian care or they didn't believe in it or for whatever reason. And so she was with her friend and she's like, we have to kill this dog. And she didn't have a gun obviously, so I think she got a shovel or something and she just kept smacking it on the head till it died or something. And the friend
Mm.
was like, I'm going to tell on you. And she's like, threatens him, if you tell on me, in classic psychopathic fashion.
Right.
If you tell on me, I will tell people that you are XYZ, like either a lie or a truth, that you said this or some embarrassing fact about this person. So I just think it's kind of interesting because I don't even think that these stories about psychopaths killing animals comes from like this place of craziness. I think it's definitely different from other people. I don't think I understand it, but the more I kind of like talk to people, the more I think, okay, I could kind of see that, even though that wouldn't be maybe my exact experience, because I've talked to other people who have, for whatever reason, killed multiple animals almost in kind of like surgical precision, but I think in kind of like also a surgical way, almost like a scientific way, so it's like, and I don't even know that they understand why they killed the animals. There's something there. I don't think it's what people expect it to be, I guess is what I'm saying, this maliciousness. But it is, especially,
Sure.
when you're a child, especially when you kind of don't understand your own feelings, or experience your own feelings the way that other people are doing, especially when you don't understand, because this is another thing I think that is true. Like I've heard from other psychopaths that they just did not understand that other people were like people as real as them, as real as the psychopath was, so you just think everybody else is kind of like a what do we say in video games? A non-player character,
Right. Yes.
NPC. Yes, they're just there to kind of like play off your dialogue, and either
Yeah.
like to tell you, oh, you need to go to the next town to find so and so, for these quests that you're on. That's kind of what it seems like. And I think that, there are a lot of us like that who just have not made that connection about animals either. And I honestly think, I've read before, like, what are we going to think in 40 years from now that was just, absurdly morally incorrect, that
Mm.
that we currently do in society? Because every 40 years, it's true, like there's some new thing that we're like, oh, that was horrible what they used to do. And I've heard people suggest, and I think it's maybe true, the way that we treat animals and the way that we eat animals and that we raise animals for eating, and the fact that we kind of think that this is like okay to do to these other sentient beings, and we don't even question it. We don't
Hmm.
even think about it, don't even question it. Same like 40 years ago, we mistreated gay people and black people. We didn't even think about it. It was just so part of our culture that nobody even questioned it. And so I think, that's not a trait that's unique to psychopaths, is that you just do something because it's just something that you haven't questioned. But that's kind of a long response. Was that kind of what you were talking about?
Yes, and I will say, what the I know why I feel the way I do about animals is that I like them much, much better than people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, and that's gonna, have roots in my childhood and how I was raised, and probably a certain amount of psychosis. But um, you know, you the thing about a dog or a cat or a possum or squirrel or whatever is what you see is what you get.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case with people. You rarely do you see what you get. Um, I and I think that even quote unquote I think everybody is on the sociopathic psychopathic spectrum, but
Agree.
they don't want to admit to it.
Yes.
They don't want to face up to what they consider, a flaw, right? Because there's just, we have this image of Hannibal Lecter.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, um, I mean, so from like, so maybe I could at some level understand, um, you know, someone that, I can definitely, not, I mean, I can definitely understand the disconnect
Yeah.
that people might have with animals, and I'm not gonna judge it because it's really not my business, you know.
Right.
It just isn't. Um, but I have that connection, and part of it is certainly based in my childhood, but also the fact that I just don't really like people.
Yeah.
I just don't. I mean, at least with this cat, I know what this cat's about, you know, and so it, and I'm almost certain that I'm not the only one. And but see, also what that does is it kind of speaks to the variety of people that are further along on the scale,
Yes,
you know?
100%. Because I have, again, what you're saying about liking animals more than people is one of these common things. Like, I don't experience it, but I've probably, maybe 30 to 40%, again, of the people I've met have said things like that.
Yeah, people are not honest. They're not honest with themselves. They're not honest with others. And to me, that goes back to that. That goes in that can be in the same um, category for me as being polite, being honorable. Uh, you know, um, like yes, I don't need to hear what someone thinks of my looks, right? And they don't need to hear what I think of them. There's a certain point when, say, honesty goes too far, right?
Right.
But and honestly, it's beside the point. Who cares?
Yes.
who cares what I think you look like, or what you think I look like? Who cares?
Or if they ask, that's fine. But I look at it from an agency perspective. So now, like, again, kind of from therapy, one thing that I've learned is before you say something that might be a little bit sensitive or critical to somebody, number one, I don't usually say it because who cares, right? It's not my
Mhm.
place. But let's say I even think it's something like, there's spinach in their teeth or something. I will ask them, hey, can I say something that's just a little bit critical or sensitive? 2 out of 10 or 1 out of 10, and then they can say yes or no. Because if they don't
Yeah.
care, they'll say no, and I don't share it. I keep that thought in my head, and so it's weird, this kind of sense that we're entitled to share these opinions about others, that somehow matters, and that we have the right to say that about other people. I think that
Mm.
is upside down.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I will, I have been, I don't know if you know anything about architecture school, but architecture school is incredibly difficult.
I can
It is
imagine.
really hard. It's crazy hard. It's like 5 or 6 years. If you do the undergraduate and a professional degree, it's 5 or 6 years of professors trying to weed you out.
Mm,
It's constant work. I mean, you have your own studio desk. It's 24/7. First and second year, I would go 2 or 3 days without sleeping. And
mm,
even then, throughout the rest of the years during the hell weeks, that is prior to a critique, you get no sleep. And then when you are doing your critiques, and that's where you take your work and you put it up on the board, your models and your drawings, and then professors and other jurors sit there and just pick it apart.
yeah, we have
Just go
something
ahead.
like that. I was a music major. We do juries too. So similar
Oh,
thing.
there
Pick
you
it
go.
apart. Yep. Master classes, same thing.
Yeah, and just destroy you. And I mean, make people like, I cannot tell you how many 18-year-old girls in first year that would just, because I'm a big giant dude, that would just come and cry on my shoulder.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And I was older. I was an older student as well. So, I mean, it wasn't anything. I wasn't messing with these people. They're going,
Right.
oh, here's an older person. It's like my big brother, and they hurt my feelings. Um, but, in these critiques, incredibly harsh. The military, okay, you better believe they're harsh, okay?
Yes.
They're going to give you their opinion, right? But then what this does is it gives you a certain amount of, um, even if even if you're like me and you don't really care what other people think, it doesn't occur to you to care, right? It's still going to give you a thicker skin.
Yeah.
Now, in the terms of the military, that is setting up the fact that the chain of command and rank is of the ultimate importance, because we don't have time for your hurt feelings. If I tell you to do something, you have to do it, or you and I could die.
Right.
In architecture school, I have no idea why they do it. I think it's just because they've been doing it for hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's like that in law school. They're like almost little hazing things that happen.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, okay, we went through it, so you're going to go through it. Um, and what's interesting also is that, and I don't know if if I don't know if the other arts are like this, but an architect or an architecture student or a designer will give you their opinion about a building. Okay, they will say that looks like garbage,
Uh-huh.
right? Like, if, for example, the 9/11 memorial,
Right.
okay, that sucks.
Uh-huh.
That I hate that. It's stupid, right? There's not a lot of thought that went into it, and but like, I don't think you have that in the other arts. I mean, yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah. Well, maybe music or something. I feel like people are harsh on, musicians that they disagree with or something. But I do think that there's more kind of yeah, maybe there's like more of a like broader kind of, like this is not my aesthetic, and so it's still an acceptable thing, even though it's not my aesthetic. Maybe you don't have that as much in architecture.
Well, in architecture, you know, the famous architects were mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Frank Lloyd Wright
I love him.
was he's great. We all bow down to Frank Lloyd Wright, okay?
Yes.
But he wrote his autobiography in the third person,
Terrible
okay?
person.
He was a horrible person. Le Corbusier, like one of
Uh-huh.
the Swiss architect, you know, one of the founders of modern architecture, well, the international style, was mean. He
Mm.
was just flat out mean. Louis Kahn, one of the greatest modern architects, you know, that this country's produced in the world as well. He had international commissions also. You know, he was a very flawed person. He
Yeah.
wasn't mean, but he was flawed.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, definitely flawed. Um, you know, so it's architects. So, in my estimation, I think it's very possible that a lot of architects are psychopaths, sociopaths.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Well, yes, because y- you are building something, you are designing something that could, not in these days when we just tear down everything, but you're designing something that could live past you, right? That's going to be around hopefully after you die. You know, there are buildings in the city that I live in that I grew up in. I don't live in the city now, but that I grew up in, that I've worked on, and I can look at it and say, that's my building. I have I was one of two or three people that because of me, that building exists, right?
Right.
Um, but you're talking about health, safety, and welfare as well. If the architect doesn't do his or her job, that the building could fall down and kill people.
Yes.
It happens you look at China, right? Their buildings
Right.
fall down all the time. It's a mess.
Yes.
So I kind of think that there's, that there's a certain amount of, uh, well, okay, the old joke, what's the difference between God and a doctor? God doesn't think he's a doctor. Well, I think you could say a little bit the same for architects. And also, the training is just so rigorous that I think you have to be of a certain mindset. And I haven't unpacked it all. Okay. I don't really know. This is just my suspicion.
Well, I
So
think at
yeah.
the minimum, like the more people I kind of like talk to and they're like, oh, you know what? It would be, is a great job is my job. I have heard so many people say that and they've had so many different jobs. Maybe the reality is being a psychopath, being on the spectrum, further to the end of the spectrum like we are, is
Mm,
beneficial for a lot of different things, a lot of different jobs. Like you've had a military career now, and now your career as an architect and designer,
mm,
and I can say the same thing about being a lawyer. I can say the same thing about being so many other different things of people I've met, even like warehouse management or something, like, oh, it
sure.
comes in so much in handy because or I've even like teachers or something, people say this where you would think, okay, you would need to be empathetic, and it's like actually there are strengths to not being empathetic, especially when it's there are these countervailing strengths that you have.
Yeah. I, and I don't believe that. Okay. One of the most annoying things I ever hear or read is when people say, "Oh, I'm an empath," right? I don't believe it. I think that's just somebody saying, "I'm a narcissist and I want you to think I'm special," right? I do. For one thing, I think if if you were an empath, right? If somebody's feelings, you know, were if somebody's feelings could overwhelm you so much that become your feelings, you're not going to leave the house, okay?
Right.
And I think that people's natural selfish desires, right? One of them being to live, okay, to survive. I think that cancels it out. You know, there is something though called group empathy, right? And what I've read, and I don't remember. I mean, this is out there. This is common knowledge. Um, but group empathy is one of the reasons that we survived as a species, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, right? It's that concept that, okay, this person, the member of our tribe, so we're a nomadic tribe and we're just walking around hunter gathering, right? But we have a member of the tribe that's very, very old, which maybe in that time was like 40, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a bum leg, and you know, I mean, they're not doing anything for the tribe. They're just another mouth to feed, but they're a member of the tribe, right? So we're going to take care of that person. And then, oh, well, as it happens, that person knows, we discover that person knows how to do something or comes up with a really great idea, and the tribe benefits. So there is that, like, as a group, empathy is a good thing, which goes back to the idea that if people are nice and polite and mind their own business and act with honor, then we as a society do better.
Right.
And also, then I don't have to put up with so much crap if I want to
Mm-hmm.
put it on a selfish level, which I'm going to do.
Yeah, and it makes sense too. Like the same way people are like, "Oh, we should have higher taxes so we can have like nicer infrastructure." The same kind of concept. I agree. So, I have a couple topics I want to get to with you, and maybe you have some thoughts on them, but maybe you don't. Number one is I have kind of maybe you have picked up on this and things. It's not so much kind of in the first book, but I'm writing a second book, and I'm really
Mm,
interested in asking people this question because of the second book, which is more on like your self-conception, your sense of identity, your sense of self. And kind of like one of my theories is that I guess some of this is my own theory, and some of this is like just common knowledge, or it's out there, as you say. So some of this is like, so a personality disorder, all personality disorders suffer from a weak sense of self, right? Or some sort of distortion, I should say, in the sense of self. So like borderline personality disorder, like they take on the selves almost like a chameleon of the people around them. They'll take on the personality
mm,
characteristics of the people they see around them. And like a narcissistic personality disorder person would have two selves, the false sense, the false self that they project to everybody, who's like, I'm perfect, I'm superior in all ways. And then the secret shameful self, I'm a loser, I'm the worst, everybody hates me, right? So that's
mm,
sort of sense of self. And the kind of unique self sense of self that the sociopath has is just a very weak one. It's very weak, and that allows them to be not even like a chameleon, but almost like, a gas that takes the form of the container that it's in, or a liquid. I like the word cipher for this. It's almost just like something that kind of doesn't exist in a way, or to the extent that it does exist, it's very flexible, but not kind of like it's trying to imitate things, but just kind of very malleable. And I wonder too, like if you have any thoughts about this, because I actually think that sociopaths are easily manipulated, especially for certain things. And I wonder if you found that, or easily indoctrinated sometimes about certain things. It's kind of like pick or choose, but I find that they can get as caught up in things like conspiracy theories as anybody else, and myself included. So I can imagine that if you're in the military, and you're kind of already predisposed to those beliefs, that you would be, indoctrinated even more to kind of value those particular things. Yeah, I mean, we get indoctrinated. You got indoctrinated in architecture school. I got brainwashed in
mm,
law school, to
mm,
think particular ways. And in some ways, it's easier for us to do well in those schools because I'm like, yes, brainwash me. Here we go.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
ready and willing to think, like an attorney, not think like a normal person anymore, right? So do you have any thoughts about like this idea of sense of self? Like, do you think, does that kind of, do you disagree with it, agree with it in part, or what?
I agree with it in part. It's quite frankly, it's easier for us to be the chameleon because we had to learn how to do that because we don't understand people, right? We especially when we're young, we just don't know where they're coming from, right?
Hmm.
We don't understand these emotions they're feeling, and so being that chameleon is a much easier way to get through life, right?
Right.
Um, Now, I always like to say that, I was brainwashed by the best, that is the U.S. military.
Hmm.
And, I actually ended up, I live in the South, uh, and I actually ended up for a while, getting involved in the Independent Baptist Church, not that long, because then I realized that it was sort of dumb, right? I started seeing the illogical aspects of religion, but that's a
Hmm.
whole nother thing. Um, and so so I kind of feel like I've had these sort of vaccinations, right, against movements and causes.
Right.
Now, I, I'm a firm believer in the Constitution, right? And I will say, yes, I'm still very much indoctrinated into that because I took an oath, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, I'm very much a firm believer in the sanctity of, the rule of law as
Oh,
far
rule
as
of law is, I'm a crazy fanatic about it. Again, I
yeah,
am like what do we call ourselves? Officer of the court or whatever. But
yeah,
yeah,
right, yeah,
like rule of law, you have to agree on something. And so why not agree that whatever the law is, we're going to apply it equally? Jeez
yes,
Louise.
yes, yes. And so, okay, does that mean that we've indoctrinated or we're indoctrinated? Well, yeah, probably, but I don't know.
Certainly. Yeah,
I gotta
socialized or something. Yeah.
I gotta believe in something, and so, but aside from that, I would say that we have a strong sense of self. I mean,
Well, here's kind of
if
what
I
I mean about
go ahead.
that. Yeah, and I kind of am curious about you too because you're like maybe I don't want to guess at your age, but you're in your second career, you have
Yeah,
some
right.
experience under your belt. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I find, and maybe this kind of goes into like my other kind of question. Like, does this sound at all kind of familiar to you? So I have kind of noticed a little bit of a trend that like psychopath, sociopathic minded people tend to go through a little bit of a series of stages, right? So they
Oh
go
yeah.
through some childhood stages. We'll just kind of skip those because I'm kind of like, murky on the details. I'd have to like remember again. But then
Hmm.
during the like, late teens, early 20s, kind of what somebody has called a playground stage, which is basically you're at your peak sociopathic traits, like everything's going well for you, like life just seems like this like party, you're like peak expression of these sociopathic traits and you really haven't felt any of the downsides of them. And people can stay in that stage, for a decade, maybe even more, couple decades or something. But then I think late 20s, early 30s, I think there you start to feel the consequences of some of these choices, broken relationships,
Mm.
maybe somebody's been arrested, maybe they've been fired from a job or had some problems in their professional life. And they start to kind of think, hey, can I keep living my life like this? I think there's also like I call it kind of the reckoning because there's kind of like a reckoning with like like why do I make the choices that I do, and kind of a sense of like a renewed sense of self, let's say, in that you're trying to become more self-aware, you're trying to self-explore, and you're also kind of trying to more self-express rather than make choices just on a whim or choices just because that's what you've been told to do. And you start to maybe kind of like push back on some of this socialization, some of this indoctrination, or some of this kind of, you just been going with the flow a little bit too much. And you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do X if it means I have to, put on a mask and pretend to be somebody that I'm not. I think is kind of like this period of the reckoning where you're like, well, then if I'm not going to wear a mask, then what am I going to do? What is there if not the mask, kind of thing. And so this is what I kind of mean by like this sense of self is, like, have you experienced a time in your life when you were, not really making choices or behaving according to, and maybe you kind of skipped it because honestly, because of the military and Taekwondo. So that's interesting too, if that's true.
No, I did not skip it. You're spot on.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with you totally. Where you grow up more and you realize, okay, um, like, and maybe, and not even aware, right?
Right.
Like what you're doing, okay, maybe that wasn't really that cool. You know what I mean? Like, but you don't know. That's the thing, is like, you're not, you don't know. You're not aware that, okay, like, I think that's why a lot of times, you can't just, okay, there's a book series. It's a science fiction series. I do a lot of reading, and I think it's called The Giving Virus, right?
Mm.
And it's like 6 or 7 books. It's a good series, and essentially it's this virus, and it makes people like just totally completely empathic, right? Okay, so it just makes them totally empathic. So
Mm-hmm.
they get to, like, in other words, if you shoot somebody and then you get this virus, and it's much better than I'm making it sound, then you are just beyond, like, sad that you did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the big twists in the book is, that's not a big twist, but is
Spoiler
that,
alert, everybody.
yeah, it's kind of a spoiler
Go
alert,
ahead
but
and
it's
tell
not.
us though. Yeah.
Yeah,
People can
it,
pause
it
and skip this section if they want.
yes, is that if you're a psychopath, that the giving virus or the giving gene has no effect on you,
Oh, really?
right? Yes. So if you're a psychopath, you stay a psychopath,
Uh-huh.
right? And I remember, I had this sort of, I read these books years and years ago, and I remember, like, one of the characters that is a psychopath, and he's not like this terrible guy, okay? And but what's happening is that then all these psychopaths are getting outed,
Right.
okay, by everybody else, and they're getting shunned, basically. And so this is a main character of the book in a position of authority. And he's saying, to the main character, when he kind of gets outed, he's saying, well, what about us? Why are we not allowed to exist?
Yeah.
And that just kind of blew my mind a little bit. It's, and I think and but that, you even have to raise that question because of movies about serial killers,
Right.
right? I mean, and I might, I think you can make the argument that narcissists do just as much damage.
Narcissists, or what, normal people or damaged people or whatever,
Yes.
and I also
Yeah.
think by not like really having an acknowledged treatment, just for people who are struggling, in relationships, that whatever it is in their careers, they can't kind of seem to get it together. There's nowhere to turn to if you're a
Mm.
psychopath, like your insurance. Like what's going to be the code? There is no known treatment. The DSM doesn't even practically acknowledge it as a disorder. There's no accepted treatment. And so like your therapist is not allowed to give you a treatment that's not this known and accepted treatment in the United States, right? There are these like legal restrictions on giving
Yeah.
people just like hack treatments that haven't been proven and approved, So you have that
Right.
issue. You have the issue of where a psychopath is like, why are we using tape on our camera? And I specifically told you, use a pseudonym, Mr. Fatal, because just in
Mhm.
case, why do we have to do this? It's terrible. And you may or may not know this, but after the book, during the book, I was a law professor. Now I'm not.
Mm.
I'm not a law professor because I got like fired and shunned from that community. Why?
Mm.
And it's like I don't mind it because I'm like, well, I'd rather live my truth. Now I'm like at that stage of like
Yeah,
after the
sure.
reckoning, I'm like living my truth no matter what, kind of stage. And I think other people should be doing it too. I think all of sorry, all of society should be living their truth, and that we'd have a better society and honestly more of a polite and respectful society if we could all just acknowledge that, hey, I'm living my truth, like I'm okay, you're okay, is the last stage, is the name of the last stage, I think, for psychopaths, but also for people, be self-actualized and then
Yeah.
allow other people to just be themselves too. Like, what is keeping us from
Right.
doing this?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, maybe if because we have a society of people that think they're better than they actually are.
Yes.
That's what I think.
And they're afraid. I think
Um,
they have secret shame about their own selves. They want the scapegoat. They want to say the bad doesn't happen from people like me. It happens from people like psychopaths. Just look at the movies.
right. Right. And I mean, I think, you know, it's probably more accepted that I would be like this because I'm a former paratrooper. So
Mm,
there is this expectation that, because I I am a trained killer, okay? That's what you do. That's what they do in the military.
right.
So I think there is this expectation that, okay, this guy already is a little bit crazy. So, we're not surprised,
Yeah,
right?
that's nice.
Whereas, so they discover, that an extremely competent law professor, is, oh, well, this person is a sociopath. Oh my God, we can't have that,
Yeah.
Um, there's a surgeon, and gosh, I know he was in a documentary, and I think he wrote a book, and he discovered that he was on the psychopathy spectrum.
Right.
And so he's talked about this, right? And he says, I've discovered I am a psychopath, right? And so he's been addressing this, and I cannot remember who it is, but I'll try to find out.
Hmm.
Um, but he has some thoughts, and that's another thing. They say surgeons
Right.
are generally on that spectrum because they have to be able to cut up people,
Yeah.
you know, and there's no guarantees of at all when you go into surgery, you sign all those pieces of paper that say, oh, if I die, um, you know, my uh, my relatives won't sue you.
Hmm.
I mean, you know better than me, but you know. So that's where I think is we assume that some people. Okay, we assume that there's this assumption nowadays that everybody on Wall Street is a psychopath or sociopath.
Hmm.
We don't know that.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true.
Well, not only do we not know that, but also it's kind of insulting to Wall Street, which does so much for our GDP, does so
Yeah.
much good in terms of like financing things, like
Mm-hmm.
basically nothing could happen without Wall Street. And it's kind of
Yeah.
like people's unwillingness to even understand things. Like you can kind of see it a little bit in defund the police too. Is like,
Mm.
okay, well then what? Or like, let's just kind of people's are weird. They just take one thing, to the next level, almost trying to second guess themselves about like whether something's appropriate. Like, do you get flack as a veteran? Does anyone say, oh, like we should never go to war, there shouldn't even be a military?
Um, I have before, and um, you know, my answer has always been fine.
Yeah.
Then, elect people that don't want to go to war. I
Right.
mean, this is, the military in this country, uh, the military is subject to the civilian authorities,
Yes.
right? I mean, and that was that was done specifically. So look, if you don't want the U.S. to go to war, then elect people who will say no, we're not going to war.
I even think with it's people like listening to this maybe even years from now. It's only like a week after the Capitol protests slash invasion.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who were like defund the police were like, there should have been more police there.
Yeah,
There should have
yeah,
been. So it's interesting because it's like, if you guys were consistent, that'd be one thing, but I don't tend to see the consistency in these positions about like, we're going to ruin this person's life because they're a psychopath, but this person's okay. And, it's just kind of like, that's why I like the rule of law, which is consistent. And I
yeah.
like your position, which is just stay out of other people's business. Because did you read this? It was Modern Love, the New York Times. And I mean, she uses her own name. It's probably fine. Patrick, I think Gagney is how you say her last name. And she's like, I'm a psychopath. I'm married to this dude. Here's kind of what it's like to be in a marriage and have children and be psychopathic. And people just like tore into her, as if like, she's not a real person. She's making it all up. She doesn't really have a PhD in psychology, just all kind of these things. And then the weirdest things were like the weird little judgments they have about her marriage. She must have like
Mm.
conned him into marrying her, all these different things. And I'm like, how is it that you guys are so certain about this? So certain about this? And also, why do you care? And is it any of your business? I mean, I find it to be
Yeah,
like
right.
inappropriate for so many reasons. And people do not kind of adhere to these same kind of standards of decency, it doesn't seem like. But, maybe we kind of come in and out because I know hundreds of years ago they probably had small town gossip, and for sure hundreds of years ago that they were killing people for being witches. So maybe it kind of just cycles.
Yeah, but I think it goes back to what you're saying, the whole scapegoat thing. People feel the need to uh, blame somebody for their problems, and also I think it's just not understanding what they're talking about. I think that's half of the issue is
Hmm.
people talk about stuff and they have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
Um, and as far as the Capitol insurrection, I am furious about that.
Hmm.
I am livid. I practically don't know what to do. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. I mean, you know, um, that, uh, you know, I mean, I'm apoplectic about that whole situation.
Right.
But, you know, and then I'm sort of happy to see that some, the insurrectionist that was shot when she was trying to cross that, last doorway.
Hmm.
uh, that was the sort of the reason she got shot. That was the final defensive position, right?
Right.
And from then on, she was going to be in the chambers.
I see.
Um, yes, and so I mean, it was not something done lightly. Um, and so she was a 15-year-old Air Force veteran,
Right.
and we live now. It's weird. We live in a sort of a society that people sort of are very respectful of us, right? Which is great. Okay, I'm glad that's the case. but they're sort of giving her a little, I don't, for some reason, they're giving her a little bit more respect than I think she should because she was in the Air Force for 15 years.
I see.
Timothy McVeigh was in 82nd Airborne.
Oh, really?
Okay. Oh yeah, he was infantry. He's one of our shameful people. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's one of our guys that we don't want to talk about. But Timothy McVeigh was in the Gulf War. He was in 82nd Airborne. He was infantry. Um, so it, it we got to call people out. I mean, nobody's sitting there saying, "Oh, Timothy McVeigh, he did this horrible thing," but he was a veteran. No, they're not doing that.
Right.
Killed children, you know. Um, so, I don't know what's wrong. I did see some of her ranting. This woman that was shot, she was very much out there. Okay. So I really digressed. I don't know why I started going on that. I
You know,
started,
I think
go
it's a
ahead.
good point though, because I think the flip, so psychopaths suffers from certain things because kind of a weak sense of self. They find themselves doing things and they don't know why. That sort of stuff. They're like they have, loose affiliations, let's say, with their own emotional state. Stuff like that. I think those are the trends that you see in psychopaths, for whatever reason, but my guess is weak sense of self. But I think on the flip side, when people kind of over identify with things, there's Paul Graham
Mm,
has like this short little essay. I think it's so good about keep your identity small. And he kind of talks about people like, I forget her name, Brittany, who died in the Capitol.
oh, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. This poor victim of her own choices in a way. But it's like when you start kind of identifying too broadly, and then you're like, I am willing, like for instance, we see this with like soccer or football, I guess, hooliganism in Europe, where
Hmm.
people are killed because they're like on the wrong team, and it seems crazy to
Yeah.
us because we don't experience it. We don't even care about soccer in the United States, but they identify so strongly with these things. And I do think sometimes that people who identify too strongly with some of these beliefs, both on the left and the right, and anything religiously, as you say, with your experience with religion and stuff, but people just when that becomes part of your identity, then when somebody criticizes that, then you take an identity hit, and
Mm,
you feel like kind of retaliating, or you have to defend yourself because now they have attacked your personhood, and I understand, why they would feel so badly, because now I understand about personhood and agency, and everybody gets to be kind of the ruler of their own domain. But if you kind of expand your domain past your actual self to include these things that don't actually include you, yeah, you're taking the identity hits, but you really shouldn't. So I think that's kind of
yeah.
like, it's interesting, on the
Yeah.
one hand, there are bad things about having a weak sense of identity. On the flip side, there are bad things about having an overly expansive sense of identity.
Yeah. Or turning it into tribalism.
Yes, tribalism. Yes, exactly what you said. We're talking about before with the group empathy.
Hmm.
Uh, yes, Mr. Fatal. Okay, so my blood sugar is getting low. It's been great talking with you, and I hope to meet you again someday. And maybe we'll set up another Zoom, especially if we can think of something like, oh, I forgot to talk about this. Then
Yeah.
we'll be in contact.
Anytime.
But do you have anything
Yeah.
else you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I'm good. I think I probably talked too much.
Here's
It was
something.
really awesome.
Yeah, no, you talk great. But here's another thing I forgot to say. One thing that I think is like a big giveaway about kind of the weak sense of self for psychopaths, especially younger psychopaths, is
Mm,
actually, ask them about their personality. Have them take a personality test. How difficult or easy is it for them? I find that, like whenever I'm forced to sit down and take a personality test, number one, I don't really care about it or its results.
yeah, right.
The same way other
Yeah.
people do. They're like, I am an ENTJ or whatever, and I am like a number 3 on the whatever scale, or, white personality or something. You know, the people all know their their ish.
Hmm.
Yes, and just like, how easy is it for you to talk about yourself? You know, if somebody says, "Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself," you know, is that something you find to be easy or difficult? Because that's just, you know, I think a little clue that we're not as in touch with our identities, our sense of self. Psychopaths, you know, kind of just a trend. You know, not like we're not in touch at all, but not as in touch with it, or we don't kind of have as strong of an identity as the rest of the population is probably a good way to put it. And maybe theirs is honestly a little bit too strong. So I think that's interesting. Anyways, yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm not surprised at all that you're like, nope, I've already said all the things I wanted to say. In fact, maybe I didn't even want to say the things I did say.
Exactly. Who
Yeah.
cares?
Yeah, who cares? Exactly. Well, I'll just like eat a sandwich and then that'll be done with it, you know. So, anyways, it was great talking with you, and
Yes.
I hope to meet you in real life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this was awesome.
All
Thank
right,
you.
we'll be in touch.